Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Older Queer Voices. Today, we are talking about something that cuts right to the heart of the LGBTQ plus community: safety, dignity, and human rights in the UK. The ongoing fight to ban conversion practices. Conversion practices, whether medical, psychological, religious, or cultural, seek to change or suppress someone's sexual orientation or gender identity. Despite repeated promises from the government, these harmful practices remain legal in the UK, leaving thousands of LGBTQ plus people, particularly young people, at risk. Today, we are joined by Simon Blake, CEO of Stonewall, and Dr. Glenn Miles, a survivor, researcher, and long-standing campaigner, to talk about the harmful reality of conversion practices and the open letter delivered to the 10 Downing Street, framed as a Christmas wish, calling on the government to finally publish a draft bill and make 2026 the year the UK bans conversion practices for good. So let's start right here: the symbolism, the timing, and why this moment matters. So, welcome back, Simon Blake.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Lovely to have you back on our Older Queer Voices podcast, and a very, very warm welcome to Glenn Miles, Dr. Glenn Miles. Glenn, I'm so happy to have you. I've read a lot about you, heard a lot about you, and have done research myself, and it's an absolute pleasure to have you on our podcast.
Thank you. That's kind of you.
So I'm going to start with you, Glenn. You have been incredibly open about your own experience of conversion practices. So, for listeners who may not know your story or your work, could you share what you went through and how these experiences shaped your understanding of just how harmful these practices can be?
Mm. Yeah, so I grew up in a conservative evangelical church. It's a very friendly, kind church, and people were very nice in it. But they drew a line under any young men or young women choosing, as they saw it, to be gay. And so it was a very popular church with young people. So a lot of young people were being influenced and affected by this. And it was really the start, in one sense, for me, of conversion practices, because the youth leaders they would be encouraging us to, purity culture and all of that. That was part of the growing up. But yeah, to have a gay relationship was completely unacceptable. So you always, and because they put it in the context of what the Bible says, then you felt like you couldn't argue. It was just, that was it. You had to listen, you had to do what the Bible said, and the Bible, in their opinion, said that it was unacceptable, and it shouldn't happen. So then you kind of have this inherent sense that you're wrong. And I think that's the underlying thing here. Children feeling that they're wrong. And I think particularly it's something that happens a lot in conservative religious backgrounds. And I recently did some research with the Matt and Naz Foundation. It wasn't specifically on conversion therapy, but it was about children coming out with conservative religious parents and what their experience was. And most of the data that we gathered was from people who may have been parents who may have been very negative at the beginning, but then over time they developed into a more loving relationship. But but we know that there were a number of who said that, know that that didn't happen. And so their parents never really fully accepted them. So not only have you got a rejection from your religious community, of which, that may be your entire real community, but also from your parents as well. As we know, it leads to suicide for many. For me, I was 19 and I read about conversion practices, a counselor, And I thought it was the right thing for me to do, was to choose to meet with him and to get counselling, because I really hoped that I could just change. I just thought it would be so much easier if I could just become something else, you know, just become a heterosexual male, or content with my sexuality. But and so I went along to these sessions. I had quite a few sessions with him. Again, very friendly, nice, welcoming guy. You know, they're not all they don't have horns, these people. You know, they are genuinely nice, and many of them believe what they're doing is you know, good, that it's the right thing to do. That makes it more insidious in a sense, you know. So uh, after some time, I left, but I did become part of what was called True Freedom Trust, and that is a trust which is still ongoing now. And they believe that it's not that there's no such thing as a gay Christian. That you and basically you have to make a choice. Either you're a Christian or you're gay, and I felt that was, again, you know, this huge pressure on you, feeling that you're not enough, that you're not adequate. I do want to say that I am still a Christian, and I have chosen to believe in God still, in spite of all this, because I've had a different understanding of who God is, and in my opinion, God loves everyone, and He doesn't just exclude a small minority of certain people at all. He never does that. And I should have known that, really, but you know, you get swept along with the beliefs, and now, so I'm really happy to be part of a loving church that is inclusive now. But I have to say that in my community, in my city, which is Swansea in Wales, there are probably only 5 of about 60 churches that are deliberately inclusive, you know, welcome gay people. And I think that's appalling. I think the church needs to just wake up and just really look at what the Bible really says, understand the context, rather than just making assumptions based on what's happened historically, to actually really look at it in detail. Because I believe that that Scripture does not, that it's not about caring, loving relationships. That's considered to be good in, you know, in Scripture. What's not, what they're talking about often is the Roman practices of, you know, the soldiers who had sex slaves, boys sex slaves. It was temple prostitution, where you had girls and boys that were being sexually exploited. There was male rape, and so all of those things, of course, the Bible spoke against those things. But when it comes to loving relationships, there's nothing that's there. And yeah, I could talk more about this, but I'll let
Sure.
you
No,
let
we will. We will
Yeah,
speak more about this because there are a lot of things that we need to dive into.
sure.
I'm just going to go to Simon, and thank you for sharing that, Glenn, because actually I can relate to it because I'm also a Christian, and
Yes,
I've seen how excluding the church can be, and I
yes.
still follow my religion, and I still pray, and I still believe, and I'm hoping that one day things change for all of us. And on that note, I'm going to go to Simon. Simon, I'm sure you have heard countless testimonies from survivors over the years because we are all in the community. So, when you just heard Glenn talk about his experience, what do you think? What stands out for you about the impact these practices have not only on individuals but also on a community as a whole?
Well, and obviously, Glenn's story is one of many, and a very sad story that anybody that wants to try to change somebody's sexual identity or gender identity, that is problematic. It is abuse, and it happens, yes, in religious settings, but also in pseudo-scientific settings as well. So, it is completely unacceptable, and we know that it's still happening now. And to your point about the, what message does it give people? Well, it says to people, LGBT people are not good enough, and we know that people experience discrimination in a range of different ways, in day-to-day press, whether that's bullying at school, whether that's in the workplace, whether that's in the community through hate crime. And conversion practices are, just another example, a particularly bad example of saying to people, actually, not only are you not good enough, but we believe we have the right to change you. And that clearly has always been unacceptable. But we are in a position now where it is still legal in the UK, and that absolutely has to change incredibly quickly, because otherwise we will hear more and more tales and stories like Glenn's, which none of us want any single human being to experience.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I was actually shocked because I haven't been living here for very long. I've been here about 12 years. And when I first heard that the legislation has not been passed, that in a country like the UK, it is still not banned, I was actually very shocked, because you think countries like India, maybe so many more steps to take before we even get here. Glenn, I'm going to come to you.
Well,
I mean,
can
because
I just come back to you on that, Raghav, for a second?
Sure,
Sorry,
sure.
sorry to interrupt.
Please,
but
please,
I think
please.
this is also one of the issues that most people, or lots of people, do not know that it still happens. Lots of people do not know it's still legal, and people think that if it is legal, that it isn't happening. And that's something that we've really got to change. And perhaps one of the reasons why we are still in a situation where it is legal is because there hasn't been that level of public understanding. Because when I talk to people, they are clear that they didn't know it was happening, but know that if they had known it's happening, they would not want it to be, and there might be greater public voice against the practices. And so, that low starting point of awareness is something that's really important.
No, you're very right, Simon. That's the thing. It's just like, what? It really shocked me. And, I'm just going to come back to you, but I have someone I know, because I get signposted. I'm in the community working with the South Asian families mostly. And I get signposted, and I'm talking about young lesbians, because that's the kind of people who come to me, who are going through religious conversion practices, very harmful, in temples, in gurudwaras, in their homes, and they don't even know that it is harmful. They just think this is what their parents do, that they're trying to help them, and that it is part of what family does. They pray for them. So, which is where, Glenn, I understand what you said, that you had to go through it yourself first to know that it wasn't right. Because you didn't know that. You were actually going to someone and talking to that person about it.
Exactly.
So,
No, I voluntarily went. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. So I voluntarily sought help. I voluntarily went to weekends away, with groups of similar thinking men, and everyone was telling me, in the end, they were telling me that celibacy was really the only way to go. But honestly, I think that I just want to. I'm not making this a sermon, but I do want to pick out one particular part in the Bible. So Jesus was talking about marriage, and then he moved on to talk about I was going to say the Hijra, because we were talking about that earlier. It's the eunuchs. He talked about the eunuchs, and he said some are born that way, and some are made that way, and some choose to be that way for the kingdom of heaven. Well, some are born that way doesn't fit with people's normal perception of what a eunuch is, which where you have your balls cut off, basically. And so it's not. I believe that Jesus was talking about the LGBT community, right? So some were born that way. Well, that's the nature nurture debate. He very much that it's people were born that there were some born that way. Some were made that way. So that would include eunuchs. Would include people who have had their balls chopped off. But there are other ways that people can be psychologically manipulated into thinking a different, that they are a different gender. They can be like we've talked about with conversion therapy, and then there's some that choose to be that way for the kingdom of heaven. Well, that's people like monks and those who choose to be in a lifestyle where they haven't chosen to be a partner. But if it's possible to choose, to be that way, then it's also possible not to choose to be that way. And if you're so that brings you back to the top category, which is some are born that way, who are not choosing to do that, then that they're the people like me who, you know, I'd love to be in a partnership and I'd love to get married. If anyone out there wants to contact me, please do. But I you know, there's that, and I think that's my interpretation of what scripture is, and I don't think it's too far-fetched. I think it's actually a reasonable, and one of the things Jesus said afterwards was, you know, this is something which it's hard for people to understand, you know, which is what he said with the challenging area of scripture. So I think, and that's of course what's true. People try and change it and manipulate it and say, no, that's not what he meant. And I believe that is what he meant.
Yeah, I'm sure. Glenn, I'm just going to stay with you. I remember a couple of years, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I was on a panel discussing women's issues on International Women's Day, and there was a therapist on that panel as well. And as soon as she heard that I was what I would call gay or lesbian, as I term myself, she instantly said to me, "Oh, just come to me. Just come to me because I have a fantastic practice. I have worked very, very closely with lots of parents and their children and made sure that they get the right help. And I have 100% positive cases." And so she's helped convert them. I was shocked. And nobody else said anything. And I kind of told her that was absolutely, appalling what she was saying. And she
Wow.
absolutely believed in it. She
Yes.
totally believed in it. And therefore, I just need to know, many people imagine conversion practices as purely like religious or purely psychological.
Yes.
But historically, they've included medical interventions like shock treatments,
Yes.
aversion
You're
therapy, as
right.
we know, forced medication, as we know. So even today, practices can be dressed up as counseling, support, or prayer. So from your experience, what kind of conversion practices are still happening? And how do
Well,
you show up in ways for people might not be immediately able to recognize because we don't know it is a conversion practice?
no, you're right. I think it's quite challenging to find it these days explicitly because it's hard to because people generally know that it's considered to be wrong. So it has to be, you have to find out about it through covert ways. But I think the thing that I want to say is what I was saying earlier with my experience with my church. It's not always like you're actually having counseling. I think that's why we call it conversion practices, because it can be just when you're in a milieu of people where everyone's saying, well, heterosexual is normal and homosexuals unacceptable. So then there's that feeling like Simon was saying, where you just feel, I just feel wrong. I'm not the right person. So that makes it harder to ban, of course, because you're dealing with something which is kind of, it's just normalized rather than something which is involving counseling. But I know, there's different healing ministries out there, and I think a lot of them, it depends on where they're coming from. So, for example, spiritual healing is an amazing thing. It's a wonderful thing. But if your background is, I'm praying for you, believing that God thinks that homosexuality is wrong, then they're going to pray for you in a different way than they would if they think alternative. And over the years, I've had a lot of people praying for me that it's basically that assuming that it's wrong, and so and that's really hard because you're thinking, well, I mean, I honestly sometimes, even now, I sometimes doubt myself and think maybe I'm just making this all up, and I think it's because I've had years and years of conditioning,
Yep.
So
Yep.
sorry, I didn't really answer your question, but I actually am working with a young woman at the moment who's working on her master's degree, and I'm trying to help her to look at different other possibilities. I know that, for example, some of the groups like Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons would have very strong perspectives on this, and so so it would be interesting to try and find out about them, their position. But yes, I think it's quite counselling. Specifically counselling would be quite hard to access.
Sure. So, but in your experience, do you see the practices still happening in terms of, where does it start? Does it stop at shock treatment? Is that still available for people? Is that still advised?
I'm not aware of it, but that doesn't mean that doesn't happen. If people think something helps, then they'll keep doing it, won't they?
Yeah.
And I think, things can help for a certain period of time, but then after a time it stops helping. So, but I'm not so familiar with what's happening at the moment.
Sure.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, that's all right. That's all right. Simon, picking up on that, when practices, can be subtle, disguised, or framed as care, how important is it that any legislation uses a clear, inclusive definition of what conversion practices actually are? Because it is quite, when we talk, listening to Glenn, I mean, people might just say, oh, I was just praying. Oh, I was just providing counseling, therapy.
Sure.
So, yeah. So, what do you think the legislation should actually show in terms of clarity?
I mean, we need to be really clear that it is about a practice which has one single goal, which is to change the way that somebody is, whether that's their sexual identity or their gender identity, and that can include those talking. I don't want to say therapy, because it is a therapy is a in my world a positive thing, and we sometimes call this conversion therapy, and it is a practice, but talking and counselling in whatever way, but also denigration, and there may be aversion techniques, there may be isolation, and so the key bit about it has to be a predetermined outcome, and I'm not a bill writer and exactly how you do that, but it's clarity that it is about trying to change somebody, and that whatever mechanisms and processes and practices that includes, those need to be banned. But also, to Glenn's point in this, of course, we cannot consent to an abusive practice, and this is an abusive practice, and so we need to make sure that there are no loopholes for people to be able to consent. But just to be really, really clear on this, that we also, some of the people will say this is going to prevent parents from having conversations with their children. This is going to prevent people from understanding, and having conversations about sexuality and identity. This isn't trying to do that. Of course, anybody who has questions about their sexuality or their gender identity needs care and support from the families and also from professionals. But care and support to enable people to explore their identity is different than anything which specifically says to somebody, you are not good enough, you are wrong, we need to change your sexual or gender identity. And that is the basis of any legislation. And we need to be able to find a way to not have to name every single practice, because you will never catch every single practice, and they will be diffuse. But we need legislation which is about the predetermined outcome which people are looking for, and that people cannot consent to something which is abuse, and that doesn't prevent those caring conversations. Conversations that are built on care enable people to explore and understand and reach conclusions about their core identity, and to have positive support around that. That doesn't try to change them. So that's the distinction, and there will be legislators who are very, very good at understanding exactly what that needs to say in terms of the legislation. But that principle is anything which is predetermined, has a predetermined outcome, and that people cannot consent to something that is abuse.
That's interesting, Simon. I was just wondering, do you think that the legislators will consult with the community, with the families, with the parents before they put this together?
So there is, we're expecting there to be pre-legislative scrutiny. So what that means is that the draft bill will be published, and then it will be considered before it goes through the formal passage within the House and within Parliament. So Scotland has done some really good consultation and published their report, because Scotland were also looking at legislation, but there isn't any formal process by which there will be consultation at a community level, but there will be pre-legislative scrutiny, and that, of course, is the opportunity for all of us to ensure that any improvements that need to be made to the bill. And of course, when the bills come into Parliament, they're all about trying to get those improvements to make sure that it does cover all of the bases that we need to make sure that it covers. So, all being well, we should be getting that before the end of the parliamentary session, which we understand is May 2026, and that then it should follow through that parliamentary process.
Oh, brilliant. That's really good to know. And, as just part of this conversation, Glenn, what I'm interested in knowing is, how does someone know when something crosses the line into harm? I mean, what are the red flags, especially when the practice is, wrapped in the language of love, healing, as you said, or religious duty?
Yeah. That is a really good question. And I think Simon just really answered it. Is this something which is trying to change somebody's sexual orientation? Is this something which is saying that they have to be celibate? It's saying it's encouraging them to be in a particular person who they are not. They're not. Yeah, I'm sorry. Maybe Simon, you can say it better than me. I'm a bit bunged up at the moment.
No, Glenn, I think it's the key bit which you are saying is it's about the predetermined, isn't it? That when if somebody is talking with you, if somebody is helping you to understand who you are and to think things through, which many of us, I think most of us, have had lots of conversations, because we live in a society which doesn't expect people to be LGBT, and so therefore, if you are not heterosexual, if you don't believe you're cisgender or fit within the binary around genders, then it is very usual to be having conversations. The bit in all of this is it crosses the line, Rega, I think, when somebody says it is not okay, you are not okay, and you need to change, and that's the piece which we've got to you are not okay, you need to change. That's the red flag, because we cannot change who we are. That is the heart of our humanity. Who we are is who we are. And as society, we sometimes have very limited definitions about what is acceptable and what is normal, and what is perceived to be good within that, and what is perceived to be bad. And everybody will have their own judgments on that, and we don't all have to believe the same. But what we cannot do in a world which is which is about equal rights, which is about freedom, which is about treating everyone with dignity, is say that somebody is lesser than and take action to try to change them. And that is whether somebody is a child, young person, or an adult. We should not be in a position where anybody is told they're not good enough, and that we believe that we have the right to change them.
Sure. I almost feel like we need to run a campaign, Simon, and raise awareness within our own community that this is not right. If you're hearing things from your loved ones or close family members that you are not right, we need to make sure that you become normal again, you get better again, that they need to take action, that they need to do something. And we'll talk about where do they find that kind of support, because that's also important. And I'll tell you, in this case of signposting towards me, I because I'm known as someone who talks to young people about this, that was fine. I was available. And that person said to me, this particular person who last spoke with said to me that she's been reaching out to many, many organizations, and nobody knows how to deal with the South Asian problem. So you see, you don't even, so there are people who want support, but they don't know where to get support either. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, Simon, because I think we need your help there. But in terms of a ban, so when we actually have a ban, what does it look like to you? What does it mean for a community?
Can you just say a bit more, Rega, about the question? So just
Yeah,
to
yeah.
explain the question.
Yeah, so we're talking about a ban. So we want this to be banned, the conversion practices to be banned. But let's say tomorrow they pass the legislation and they ban this. So what happens? So let's say, for example, if this person who came to me felt that their family was putting them through a conversion, very harmful practice,
Mhm.
who could they reach out to? Can they go to the cops and the cops will say, oh, this is now banned, you, this is what's going to happen to you? So is those kind of things. So what will change once we have a legislation passed?
Well, so that will all be determined by the legislation. But if something becomes illegal, there will be legal sanctions which will go with that. And so similarly around female genital mutilation, that is a legal practice. We know that sometimes it still happens, and if it is identified and people within this country it still happens, they would be, if they are medically trained, if they're on, in terms of conversion practices, somebody might have their medical status, their registration status affected. There might be legal proceedings. All of that will come through the ban. But the point about it will be that it will be illegal, and the challenge will be understanding. Therefore, as with anything, how do you then raise awareness for people about what to do if these things happen, where to go, how to say it's happening, and all of that is about, legislation is one thing, but culture change is the other. And that's why you can never just have legislation. You also do have, exactly as you say, public awareness, public support, and understanding that there will be support services that are available to people to access if they need to. And that might be existing services like Switchboard, or it might be Gallup, which provides the violence anti-violence helpline. So all of these services would need to be equipped and understand what they should do if somebody does contact them, so they're providing the right information. And I think what we've got at the moment is A, it's legal, B, a sense that we've also got a cultural context in which you have some young people growing up who think that actually this might be a better option than living as their true selves, and adults similarly. And so by shifting that legislation, making sure it's illegal, shifting the culture so that people know that it is unacceptable to be told that you need to change, and then ensuring that there are generalist services which are equipped to signpost people to the right places, but also then specialist services as well. So we know that that survivors of conversion practices may need particular support, and it would be brilliant to be able to signpost them to organizations that have people who are specifically trained and have the confidence to have those conversations to help people make sense of what has happened and to heal and to rebuild.
Interesting, Simon, because when I was talking to a few of my people that have been through this conversion practice, and I said, let's talk about it. Because so that people know that this is right and this is not right. Yeah, but they don't want to. And I know this person said to me, but it's my parents. I can't talk against my parents. They did it out of love for me. So there is that as well, that we need to make sure, like we said, we have raised awareness, so we know how to protect ourselves and when to protect ourselves. And if we see it happening with someone else, we know the action that we need to take as well. Because I think all these things are interconnected. Yeah, and Glenn, and I know that you've done a lot of research in this space. I just want to know, was there a reason why both you, Simon, Sabah, band conversion therapy, decided to frame this around the Christmas as a Christmas wish for 2026? Was there a strategic reason to do that?
Well, I think it wasn't my decision. It was more Simon's, but I love the idea of it being now, in one sense, because it would be a gift for people who have experiences like myself, to know that there's now legislation in place that will help others in the future. I've been involved with also particularly with legislation around corporal punishment. Now, with corporal punishment, everyone feels that if there's a law, then that means that people won't be able to smack their children and at home or anything. Well, it is a discouragement for people to do that thing. But what it actually means in practice is that if someone is using serious violent abuse against their children, then there's legislation to go to. It doesn't mean that every pastor who's talking to his children, or every parent who's having a conversation with their children about their sexuality, that they're going to be at risk of being hauled off to jail. I mean, that's not what we're talking about here. But I think that once you have legislation in place, then it means people have to think twice. And I would suspect that if the people involved in doing serious counselling about this, that there will be some of them who say, "Oh, I'm not going to touch it because I don't want to go to jail." And there'll be other people who say, "Oh, well, I feel God's still called me to do this, so I need to do it." That there will be people who feel that they have a higher call than what the law says, and that's the ones who will be a challenge for, I think, honestly, in my
Sure.
opinion. And they're the ones who I think need it. And I hope that at one point there will be test cases of people where they actually do. They are prosecuted properly, because if there isn't really prosecution with it that happens, then there will be then people will just continue to do it. So I think there's a lot of stuff there, but I don't have my PhD isn't in law, so I think the
Yeah,
law
sure.
is that important. But this is a human rights issue, and I think we need to realize that it's a human rights issue. It's a child rights issue, and I think ideally we need to be listening to children. We need to listen much better. I always say to people, you need to have bigger ears and a smaller mouth. We're just not good at doing that with children. We need to sit down with them and find out what's going on in their lives, what's making them think about these things, and how can they feel supported and loved. I think it must be particularly challenging for you, Raga, in the Asian community, because and I know that the Christian Asian community are the community in which Nat and Maz Foundation work. They have a particular group that they're working with, which is from South India, and I think the parents feel that they love their children, but they feel that they can't abandon their faith, and that's the sad thing about it. They need help to understand you don't have to abandon your faith. And
Yeah,
your children need you,
yeah.
because
It's shocking what all they do, in the name of religion and faith.
exactly, yes,
Yeah. You
And
know,
I think is
go on. Yeah,
can I
sorry.
just add? I think it's really important to also say that, of course, that it happens in non-religious families
yes,
as well, and I think that it is important to think of it as a children's rights issues and a children rights issue, and as a human rights issue, but also it's a safeguarding issue. And for some people, the word rights doesn't tally up quite as much, and particularly when you're talking about children's rights. I spent a lot of my career working in children's organizations and working around, underpinned by the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which we signed up to in 1989 here in the UK. And sometimes people don't believe that children have rights. And I think, of course, they have rights. They're very clearly set out. But when we do think about this as abuse, you also think about it as a safeguarding issue. And that's also true as adults. It's a safeguarding issue. It's about dealing with violence, and that we can really just try to ensure that we're lining it up, and it's saying that it is in that same sort of category of abuse, which means that it is very much a safeguarding issue, and we everybody deserves to be protected, regardless of their sexual or gender identity.
I think that's really important, Simon. And safeguarding is something that all churches and organisations that are working with children now have, are obliged to do. It's what all donors require it, which and so it has to be written. Well, they need to be scrutinised. Those and I think it would be really useful for there to be some this issue to be incorporated into safeguarding policies, because then you have the churches and organisations who have a clear understanding about this. They'll be happy to include it in their policy, and those organisations who are not quite so convinced, they're the ones that need support and encouragement into really thinking these things through. And I hope that podcasts like this will help people to see that it's not only that it's not historical, but it's actually still happening, but also that it challenges them to think about what are the issues, what are the rights of children. And one of the key rights for children is to be listened to and to be heard. So I'm going to keep emphasizing that because it's so important. I think there's when children aren't listened to and people think they know what's best for them, then that's not helpful for their development anyway. They need to be trusted, and they need to be loved and supported in the decisions that they make, even if the decisions are not necessarily the ones that the parents want, or teachers or youth leaders or whatever. They have to listen better.
And Raga, to go back to your question, which is why did we do it at Christmas?
Yeah.
Why did the Ban Conversion Practice Coalition do this at Christmas, of which Stonewall is a member? Well, this is the 8th Christmas since the legislation was announced, and it was as Glenn said, it's about that gift of safety and dignity and freedom, which everybody, including people from the LGBTQ plus community, deserve. And so we wanted to use this as an opportunity to say, enough is enough. It is time now for the legislation to be passed. It was announced in the King's speech previously, and it wasn't passed. And this government, it had it in its manifesto and was announced in the King's speech. And we are coming towards the end of the parliamentary session. It's been repeatedly, we've been told that it is forthcoming, and I'm hopeful, because I'm always an optimist, that it will be here in 2026. But when something has been happening for this long, and when we've been trying to create that sort of awareness and understanding for this long, it was an opportunity for us to use this moment to say, it is expected. We are hopeful it's coming. Please make sure that you give LGBT communities the gift of safety. Every single person deserves to be safe. Everybody deserves to live with dignity. Everybody deserves freedoms, and that is the basics. And so we really wanted to use this opportunity to say and that we expect from government, but also to raise awareness, because go all the way back to saying that we start from a position which is a low starting point in terms of awareness, that conversion practices still exist. And so this was that opportunity to raise public awareness, to make a statement, and to speak directly to the Prime Minister and to the Minister for Women and Equalities and the Minister for Equalities, and to urge them to bring forward the legislation, because we know when people know it exists that people want this to happen. They want the legislation brought forward, because most people, the absolute moral majority of people, do not want people subjected to abuse of any sort, including conversion practices.
Sure. And in terms of, did you get a response, Simon, to that letter?
We won't have got a response yet. It was only last
Okay.
Thursday, so Thursday
Okay.
the 17th or 18th of December. But we
Yeah.
would expect a response to come, and we will continue working, as part of the coalition. We continuing to have meetings with ministers and civil servants, and this is always on the agenda. Along with the Equality Human Rights Commission Code of Conduct, along with equalising hate crime, along with really ensuring that we are continuing to try to, we try to get further, better around LGBT rights. We know we've slipped from first in Europe, according to the ILGA rankings, down to number 22. And as a country, we need to be leading the way. We need to be a country that is at the forefront of LGBT rights. And this is absolutely one of those pieces of legislation. A basic. It's not even one we should be having to talk about any longer, because it should absolutely be banned. So we will continue pressing, working as a coalition, as Stonewall, until that legislation is brought forward.
Just so you know, I'm here if you need any support from older queer voices, personally me, because I have lots of these stories, and most of them won't come out and talk about it, but we need stories out there, real stories where people can see what harm it has caused in their in the professional life, in their personal life, and older queers like us, And Simon, do you know what is holding the government back? Is there any kind of understanding of that?
I wouldn't like to guess. I mean, I think
Yeah,
that
sure.
clearly there's been an enormous legislative agenda. We know that there's polarization around LGBT rights, and that there has been, particularly around trans and non-binary issues. We know that last time there was legislation brought forward, that there were some a decision around whether or not it would be trans inclusive, and we are really, really clear that this has to be a fully inclusive ban that would include all lesbian, gay, bi, trans and queer people. So I wouldn't like to guess, but clearly, whatever it is that's holding it up, there is no acceptable reason for it to be held up. And we've heard the Prime Minister and various ministers talk successively. So as I say, we just have to be optimistic that this does, and that any questions that do come forward, that we are able to respond to those as part of the pre-legislative scrutiny, as part of the parliamentary passage. Whilst there isn't a bill published, we can't see what's good enough, where there are areas that need improvement, can't help push that forward, as it goes through both houses.
And worldwide, I think there are very few countries who have banned conversion therapy. I in my research, I thought it was parts of Australia, Netherlands, as I said, Gibraltar. They've already passed bans, right? So, what lessons have you read through that? And I'm sure you have a lot of knowledge about what's happening in these countries and how it has affected people when the ban's been put in place. So, what lessons do you think UK can learn from these examples, Simon?
So the first thing I want to just say, and I'm sorry to be a pedant about it, but we mustn't call it conversion therapy. We must call it conversion practices. As we change hearts and minds about this, we have to be really, really explicit about what it is. And I think for most people, they have therapy as a good thing, and so just to be a pedant on that. What we know worldwide, and this is probably the most important thing, is that it doesn't stop people having caring conversations. And so some people who oppose a ban or say that it is not necessary because it doesn't happen, we know that in countries that have banned, that it does root out practice, and it doesn't prevent people from getting care and support that they need at the same time. So that's probably the most important thing that we can learn here. But it also sends a signal that LGBT identities are important, they're valid, and they're equal, and are worthy of the respect that every single person gets. So I think obviously there are some things which legislators will learn in terms of how do you ensure that it is fully inclusive, how do you make sure that it sets the tone in the right way, and they'll also be looking at what some of those sanctions would be. But the most important bit, which I think is that it is important, it does set the tone, that it has stopped practices happening, and it doesn't prevent people, children, young people and adults, from getting the care and support that they need around exploratory conversations, which is one of the things that some people say that a ban will do, and it absolutely doesn't do that. It ensures that people do get the care and support that they need.
Sure. And conversion practices, sorry, I called it conversion therapy. I take your point, and it's just you're talking so much about therapy, so automatic. So my apologies. And Simon,
Okay.
do you want to make a comment? Sorry, not Simon. Glenn, do you want to make a comment on this as well?
I think I was really proud to be part of the small group that went to 10 Downing Street. I feel it was a real privilege for me to be there, and I feel that we've really different organisations that are different LGBT organisations need to understand their role in this and how important it is for them to contribute to the discussion. So, and I think, and as I said, churches and mosques and other places where young people are being brought up within faith communities, I think there needs to be discussion there as well. When they need to know where they can feel safe and heard. In my church, we had a discussion recently where there was they were talking about inclusivity with the children, and I said, please, we must make this. It's really important that we do say this out loud, that everyone's included, and that it isn't just hidden. Isn't just hidden away. I think because I know what it was like in my own church. If I'd have heard that message that if you feel attracted towards other boys, then it's okay. That doesn't make you a bad person. I would have been so relieved. So having being in a church where there isn't that below is what I hope we can encourage all churches eventually to be. I would love to see, because I like when Simon talks about conversion practices, I think it really is. So the background of this is the communities in which we live. What is the attitudes within the community? And if we can encourage communities to be inclusive, then that means there's no place for conversion practices.
Sure. So I know, Simon, you're being optimistic, so I'm not going to ask you this question as what happens if the bill doesn't get passed in 2026. But what I want to know is, how do we as a community keep pushing, keep organizing, and keep the pressure? Yeah.
Sure. So I think the most important thing is to recognise that we can all play a part, and whether that is writing to your MP, and if people have a story which they're willing to share, an experience that they're willing to share, to make sure that it, if they are writing to the MP, that it brings it to life for people. It makes it real. This is about winning hearts and minds, and clearly not everybody will be comfortable to share, but where people are willing to share, and thank you, Glenn, for sharing your story. It makes it feel impossible to say that we shouldn't take action on this quickly. There's also, as organisations, to follow the ban conversion organisations and individuals to follow the ban conversion practices feed on LinkedIn, where there will be calls to action at various points and information to keep abreast of what is happening at particular points of time, because there will be moments where it might be important to lend support, to lend voice to. And ultimately, it's about acknowledging that this happens within the community. For lots of us, it can feel as though there are so many things which we want to change, that there are so many injustices that are out there. But this is an important moment for this particular piece of legislation, which will send a signal to everybody that people who are lesbian, gay, bi, trans, and queer are valid and equal and deserve to be seen and heard. So this is a sort of it is both a really important piece of legislation for what it will prevent, but also another piece in that jigsaw on our long march towards equality and sending a signal that people, deserve to be seen and heard and treated equally. So really, really encouraging people to get involved, to keep talking about it, share stories if they can, follow the work of the Ban Conversion Practices Coalition on LinkedIn and on other social channels, and keep sharing that information so it reaches far and wide, so that we can finally make 2026 the year that we do ban conversion practices and we do actually make sure that we say enough is enough. This abuse is unacceptable.
Absolutely, enough is enough. And we will add all the links on our caption as part of when we release the podcast, Simon. That's really useful information. Do follow Banned Conversion Practices on social media, LinkedIn, they're on Instagram as well. And finally, I think we're coming to the end of the wonderful session with you both. So for anyone listening who may be facing pressure, coercion, harmful practices right now, what can they do? And how do they reach out, and who do they reach out for support? Is there something we can put together and share with the podcast? Glenn, you want to start?
I think if you're part of a community where you're feeling like you're just not enough, you're somehow wrong, then I think it's really helpful to think about how you can leave the community safely and find another community that's open and inclusive and accepts you. And I know that's really hard to do if you've been brought up in a particular denomination or a particular church or a particular ethnic group. I understand it's hard to do, but I think you have to think about the long-term effects on your mental health and on who you are. You can choose to do it at your pace and when you're ready, but don't try to block out those voices that are telling you that you're not right, because you are. I believe you're who God's made you to be, and you're perfect as you are, and you don't need to change.
Thank you, Glenn. That was powerful. And Simon?
Well, I think the first thing is, lots of us will have different people that we trust. So there isn't any one person. It might be an aunt, it might be an uncle, it might be a best friend, it might be a best friend's parent. So the key thing if you are worried or nervous or scared, is to find somebody that you trust. If there is somebody within your familial network or community network, then do talk to them. But otherwise, Childline is there and is a free number to call. The Samaritans are there right across the holiday period. National Switchboard is available. There are a range of different helplines, and we can make sure that you have those, Raga, to go with the podcast. But the key thing that I would just say to anybody is if it feels wrong, if it feels as though you're being pressured, if it feels as though somebody is trying to do something to you which is unacceptable, like with all forms of abuse, don't sit there on your own. There will always be somebody who is available to talk, and that might be somebody who and if it's not, there will be somebody in all of those help and support services. Those people are trained and they won't be judgmental. They'll want to provide that help. And to Glenn's point about, they will also go at your pace. We will want to help you to access help and support and ways through in a way which is acceptable for you. And everybody deserves that kindness, that care, and that support. And there are lots and lots of people out there that will help you. You never have to do this alone.
Excellent, Simon. This is a really fantastic way to end the podcast. But unless, of course, Glenn and you have to say any final words, you're welcome, please. Glenn, is there anything you want to add to what you've said?
Exactly the right words.
I think it leaves us with so much hope, Simon. Thank you.
Mm.
Go on.
Thank you.
So do you want to say anything? Final words before we conclude?
Yeah,
You're
all
good?
good, all good. I think thank you for the opportunity, Raga, to talk about it. It's really important that we keep talking about conversion practices. If we, I hopefully there was nobody that started this thinking that they were that they didn't exist and they were already illegal. But if one person listening now knows that they are still legal in this country and they still exist and are therefore willing to stand up and say, that it's time for this to end, then that would be great. And if anybody's listening that has experienced it, that hasn't accessed help, or is experiencing it and needs to access help, again, just know that there are lots and lots of people out there ready to provide that help and support that everybody deserves.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you, Glenn. I mean, thank you for your honesty, your insight, and your continued work. I'm so glad that you restarted this conversation on, banning conversion practices. Today's conversation is a reminder that banning conversion practices isn't symbolic. It's about safety, dignity, and equality. It's about protecting people from harm that is still happening right now in communities across the UK. Every day without a ban is another day when someone is at risk. The Christmas wish letter delivered to number 10 Downing Street is a clear message. It's time for the government to move beyond promises and take decisive action. As we look towards 2026, the hope is that this will be a year the government finally delivers. So no LGBTQ plus person ever has to endure conversion practices again. Through advocacy, awareness, survivor testimony, legislation, as Simon said, we can make lasting change a reality. I'm also going to take the opportunity to thank our outreach partners, outspoken speakers, Proud HR, My G Work, Ageism is Never in Style, GFW Clothing, and Out and Wild. Also, thank you, Nicola, for helping us in the background. Thank you to our viewers for listening. Please share your feedback. Please share this podcast. Please share the message. Make a comment. Talk about this to anybody who needs to be listened to. If you want to be a guest on this podcast or wish to nominate someone, please write to us at theviewsroom@gmail.com. Thank you again, Glenn and Simon. It was wonderful to have you on our podcast and look forward to a fantastic 2026. Thank you.